The Hart Senate office building didn't smell like democracy. It smelled of lemon pledge, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of ambition. To the uninitiated, it was a hall of governance. To Pete Hegseth, sitting alone at the witness table, the polished mahogany looked less like furniture and more like the barricades of an enemy fortification. The air in the room was recycled, scrubbed of all humidity, leaving it dry enough to crack a lip. It was cold, deliberately so, a physiological tactic designed to keep the adrenaline high and the comfort low. Hegseth adjusted his cuffs. He could feel the weight of the eyes on him. Not just the eyes in the room. The staffers whispering behind manicured hands, the reporters sharpening their pencils like shivs, but the electronic eyes. The cameras, red lights blinking like the unblinking gaze of a predator waiting for the prey to stumble. He was the outsider, the intruder, the man who had dared to step from the battlefield to the television screen, and now to the inner sanctum of the Pentagon. And the establishment hated him for it. They hated his hair. They hated his tattoos. But mostly, they hated that he didn't fear them. But today, they intended to teach him fear. Across the dais, the high ground sat in judgment. The Democrats, they looked comfortable. Why wouldn't they be? This was their arena. They wrote the rules, they set the schedule, and they held the gavel. Senator Jack Reed, the chairman, cleared his throat. It was a wet, bureaucratic sound, a sound that signaled the beginning of a ritual execution disguised as a job interview. Captain Mark Kelly, Reed's voice droned, lacking any warmth. You're recognized. The spotlight shifted. Mark Kelly, the astronaut, the American hero, the man who had touched the stars and come back to Earth to serve the people. That was the brochure. That was the narrative the media pumped into the veins of the electorate. But from where Hegseth sat, looking up at the elevated platform, he didn't see an astronaut. He saw a shark in a suit. Kelly sat perfectly still. His bald head reflected the harsh overhead lights, a marble statue of piety. He adjusted his microphone with slow, deliberate fingers. There was no shaking, no nervousness, just the calm, terrifying precision of a man who had rehearsed this moment with a team of 20 lawyers and opposition researchers for the last 48 hours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Kelly began. His voice was smooth, polished, the kind of voice that sold life insurance or announced the end of the world with equal equanimity. He paused, a theatrical beat, clearing his throat as if to signal the gravity of his next words. Congratulations on your chairmanship. It was a nicety, a throwaway line, but in D.C., even the pleasantries were weaponized. It was a reminder of who was in charge. We are the majority. You are the guest. Hegseth kept his face neutral. He had trained for this. He had faced bullets in Iraq and Afghanistan. He could handle words in Washington. Or so he told himself. But bullets were honest. They either missed you or they killed you. Words in this room were different. They maimed you slowly. They lingered. They festered. Kelly continued, his eyes scanning a piece of paper in front of him. He wasn't looking at Hegseth. Not yet. He was looking at the script. The trap had to be set correctly before it could be sprung. I want to make a request to the committee, Kelly said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more procedural, more officious. That we have a second round of questions pursuant to the bipartisan staff agreement that we reached late last year. Hegseth's internal radar pinged. A second round. They weren't done. They wanted more blood. They knew 7 minutes wasn't enough to dismantle a man's life. They needed double that. They wanted to drag this out, to keep him under the lights until he sweated through his suit, until he misspoke, until he gave them the soundbite that would run on CNN for the next week. This will be one round of 7-minute questions. The chairman interrupted, or rather corrected. The air in the room shifted. A subtle change in pressure. Wait. Hegseth blinked. One round. The script was glitching. Senator Roger Wicker, the ranking Republican, leaned into his microphone. He was the old guard, a man who had seen these games played for decades. He knew when the deck was being stacked. He knew that limiting the time wasn't about efficiency. It was about control. If you limit the rounds, you limit the defense. But if you deny the second round, you also limit the prosecution. But wait, Kelly wanted the second round. The Democrats wanted more time to attack. The chairman, seemingly confused or perhaps sticking to a prearranged kill schedule that Kelly had deviated from, was shutting it down. "Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Kelly said. He didn't sound thankful. He sounded like a man who had just been told the firing squad only had one bullet, so he better make it count. "I'll be happy to recognize my colleague, Mr. Reed." Confusion rippled through the Republican side of the dais. Whispers. A rustling of papers. This was the swamp at its finest, changing the rules in real time. Suddenly, a voice cut through the procedural fog. It wasn't Kelly. It wasn't the chairman. It was a Republican voice, sharp with indignation. I think it's important to note for the record," the senator interjected, his voice tight. He wasn't playing along. He was pulling back the curtain. "That when Secretary Hagel was here, we had 3 rounds of questioning." Hegseth watched the exchange, feeling like a spectator at his own funeral. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "When was there, guys? Hagel, Carter, the doors were thrown open. Ask whatever you want. Take all day. Transparency is democracy. 3 rounds. 2 rounds. Unlimited scrutiny for the anointed ones." When Secretary Carter was here, the Republican senator continued, pointing a finger that trembled slightly with suppressed rage. "We had 2 rounds of questioning. And, I cannot recall any time where I have denied as a chairman a member to ask for a second round and receive the second round." Boom. There it was. The double standard. The cardinal sin of the establishment. Rules for thee, but not for me. The Republican senator was painting a picture for the record, for history. He was saying, "Look at what they are doing. They are gagging us, or they are protecting someone, or they are manipulating the clock to ensure the narrative fits the broadcast slot. So we are, I think, violating the principles of the committee." The senator stammered slightly, the sheer audacity of the Democrats' maneuvering causing him to stumble. "And I just want to go on the record." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Violating principles. A quaint concept in this city. The chairman, Senator Reed, didn't blink. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer a rebuttal. He simply looked down at his notes, his face a mask of bureaucratic indifference. He possessed the ultimate power of the majority, the power to ignore. And the chairman mumbled, waving a hand dismissively. Your comment is noted." Noted. The political equivalent of shut up and sit down. Hegseth tightened his jaw. He felt a muscle jump in his cheek. Noted. That's what they did to complaints from the heartland. Noted. That's what they did to the concerns of veterans dying in VA waiting rooms. Noted. They filed it away in the trash can of history and moved on to the agenda. The procedural skirmish was over. The Republicans had registered their protest, and the Democrats had rolled right over it like a tank over a speed bump. The stage was now clear. The distractions were removed. The chairman turned his gaze back to Mark Kelly. The silent signal was given. "Execute." "Thank you," the chairman said. Kelly shifted in his seat. The procedural mask dropped. The shark smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows the cage door is locked and the feeder is empty. "Mr. Hegseth," Kelly began. The name hung in the air. "Thank you for being here today." Line number 1. He didn't want him here. He wanted him gone. He wanted him withdrawn, disgraced, and exiled. "Thank you for your service to this country." Line number 2. It was a mandatory preface. The verbal salute before the stab in the back. You have to thank the veteran before you destroy him, otherwise the optics are bad. "Thank you, Senator," Hegseth replied. His voice was steady, deeper than Kelly's. The voice of a broadcaster, yes, but also the voice of a platoon commander. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of hearing a quiver. He leaned forward slightly, engaging the enemy. Kelly looked down at his papers again. He wasn't making eye contact. He was reading the dossier, reading the opposition research file that some intern had spent weeks compiling, digging through trash, scrolling through archives, finding every misstep, every stumble, every moment of human weakness in Hegseth's 40-odd years of life. Few nominees come into this room with all the necessary experience to do this job, Kelly said, his tone deceptively conversational. To be Secretary of Defense. We get that. We get that. The royal we. The establishment consensus. It's a reflection on just how big of a job this is, Kelly continued, spinning the narrative. He was building a logical trap. The job is huge, almost impossible. So if you aren't perfect, you are dangerous. What I want to understand. Kelly paused. This was the pivot. The moment the knife came out of the sheath, is whether or not you bring any of the necessary experience that this job requires. The insult was subtle, wrapped in the guise of due diligence. He wasn't asking about policy. He wasn't asking about China or Russia or the recruitment crisis. He was questioning Hegseth's very existence in that chair. And here's where I'm concerned. Concerned. The favorite word of the political assassin. I'm not attacking you. I'm just concerned. It framed the attacker as a virtuous protector of the public good and the target as a liability. Kelly looked up then. For the first time, he locked eyes with Hegseth. The astronaut's eyes were cold, void of empathy. He wasn't looking at a fellow serviceman. He was looking at a target package. Senator Coleman, in introducing you, Kelly read, quoting a Republican to use against a Republican, a classic move. And this is a quote. He said he has struggled and overcome great personal challenges. Unquote. Hegseth felt a cold prickle of anticipation at the base of his neck. He knew where this was going. They weren't going to talk about his Bronze Stars. They weren't going to talk about his advocacy for veterans. They were going to talk about the darkness, the late nights, the booze, the things he had battled in the quiet, desperate hours after the war, the things he had been open about in his book. He had written that book to help others, to say, hey, I'm broken too, but we can fix this. He hadn't written it to give Mark Kelly ammunition. But in Washington, vulnerability isn't courage. It's a target. You walk in here saying that you've had personal and character issues in your past, Kelly said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming grave. Including heavy drinking, which you wrote about. The room seemed to shrink. The camera zoomed in. The shutter clicks of the photographers went into overdrive, click, 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 like the sound of cicadas sensing a storm. Kelly leaned forward, his face hardening. And you said, and this is a quote from you, that you said, I sit before you as an open book. Kelly let the silence hang. He was savoring the irony he was about to manufacture. Yet, Kelly said, the word landing like a hammer blow. You haven't actually said what personal challenges it is that you've overcome when you've been asked about them. It was a masterful gaslight. Hegseth had written a whole book about it. He had spoken about it on television. He had been an open book. But Kelly was rewriting reality. He was claiming that because Hegseth hadn't confessed to specific and proven anonymous allegations right here, right now, that he was hiding something. So, Kelly said, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. The trap was set. The cage door was closed. I'm going to give you an opportunity here to be as forthright as you say you want to be. Hegseth's hands gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. He wasn't facing an inquiry. He was facing an ambush. And he knew, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that the man sitting across from him didn't want the truth. He wanted a headline. The silence that followed Mark Kelly's offer was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hovering at the apex, just before the latch is pulled. I'm going to give you an opportunity here to be as forthright as you say you want to be, Kelly had said. It was a linguistic Trojan horse. On the surface, it sounded generous. A benevolent senator offering a beleaguered nominee a chance to clear the air. Tell your side of the story, son. Let's put this to bed. But Pete Hegseth, sitting alone in the crosshairs, saw the Greeks inside the horse. He saw the swords. He knew that in Washington, opportunity was a code word for entrapment. Hegseth shifted slightly in his chair. The leather creaked, a sound that seemed disproportionately loud in the cavernous, acoustic-paneled room. He looked at Kelly, really looked at him. The astronaut was gone. The man who had floated in the tin can above the blue marble. The man who had presumably seen the unity of humanity from space had been fully metabolized by the DC organism. He was now just a delivery system for opposition research. So, Kelly continued, and his voice took on a new texture. It was sharper now. The conversational veneer was peeling away like cheap paint. He wasn't asking anymore. He was reciting. While leading concerned veterans of America, Kelly began. He emphasized the name of the organization, Concerned Veterans of America, a group that had fought for VA reform, that had challenged the bloated bureaucracy that let veterans die on waiting lists, a group that had been a thorn in the side of the establishment for years. Kelly wasn't just attacking Hegseth, he was attacking the movement. He was putting the very idea of disruptive veteran advocacy on trial. There were very specific cases cited by individuals about your conduct. Individuals. The word hung there, vague and smoky. Not sworn witnesses, not police reports, not signed affidavits. Just individuals. Ghosts. Phantoms in the machine. People who whispered in dark corners to Politico reporters but refused to show their faces in the light of day. Hegseth knew these individuals. They were likely disgruntled former staffers, people fired for incompetence, or political operatives planted to gather dirt. In the real world, in the military, in a court of law, anonymous hearsay was garbage. It was inadmissible. But this wasn't a court of law. This was a Senate confirmation hearing. The burden of proof here wasn't beyond a reasonable doubt. It was, can we make you look bad enough on the evening news to kill your nomination? Kelly looked down at his dossier again. The papers were crisp, white, and filled with black ink that Hegseth couldn't read from this distance. But he knew what was on them. The smear file. I'm going to go through a few of them, Kelly announced, his tone clinical, like a surgeon selecting a scalpel. And I just want you to tell me if these are true or false. True or false? Hegseth's stomach tightened. This was the trap. The binary trap. It was the oldest trick in the prosecutor's handbook and a favorite of the political inquisitor. By forcing a true or false answer, Kelly was stripping away context. He was criminalizing nuance. If Hegseth said false, the media would run headlines. Hegseth denies allegations. Then they would parade the anonymous sources to call him a liar. If he tried to explain, well, Senator, actually that night was a celebration and Kelly would cut him off. I just asked for true or false, Mr. Hegseth. Are you incapable of a simple answer? It was a lose-lose scenario. It was a kill box designed to make him look either evasive or guilty. Very simple, Kelly added, almost mockingly. Nothing about this was simple. It was a complex assassination of character choreographed to the second. Hegseth took a breath. He had to remain calm. He had to channel the discipline he had learned in Guantanamo Bay, in Iraq, in Samara. He had to remember that the man across from him was not a superior officer, despite the tone. He was a politician playing a part. Hegseth glanced at the Republican senators on the panel. Some looked down at their desks, uncomfortable. Others looked at Kelly with narrowed eyes, recognizing the game, but powerless to stop it in the moment. The rules of decorum bound them. They had to let the hitman finish his job before they could intervene. Kelly raised his eyes. The first arrow was notched. On Memorial Day, 2014, Kelly said. The date landed with a thud. Memorial Day. Hegseth felt a flash of genuine anger. Memorial Day wasn't just a date on the calendar for men like them. It wasn't a barbecue holiday. It was a day of ghosts, a day of black bracelets and poured drinks for friends who didn't come home. For Kelly to use that specific day as the setting for a political hit, it felt sacrilegious. It was a calculated emotional trigger. At a CVA event in Virginia, Kelly continued, reading verbatim from the sheet, ensuring every word was captured by the stenographer. You needed to be carried out of the event for being intoxicated. The accusation hung in the air, grotesque and humiliating. Carried out. The imagery was specific and devastating. It painted a picture of a man not just drunk, but incapacitated. A sloppy, incoherent mess. A man who couldn't walk. A man who was supposed to be leading veterans, the nation's warriors, reduced to a dead weight being hauled out like a sack of garbage. The room seemed to hold its breath. The reporters stopped typing for a split second, waiting for the reaction. This was the money shot. This was the clip that would go viral on Twitter within minutes. Hegseth, the drunk. Pete Hegseth looked at Mark Kelly. He didn't see his senator anymore. He saw the machinery of the swamp. He saw the soulless, grinding gears that chewed up outsiders and spat them out. They weren't asking about his strategy for the Indo-Pacific. They weren't asking about how to fix the recruitment crisis. They were asking about a party in 2014 based on an anonymous whisper. Hegseth's mind raced. He remembered that time. He remembered the camaraderie, the stress, the release. He remembered the culture of work hard, play hard that was pervasive in veteran circles. Men who had seen too much, trying to feel normal again. Was there drinking? Yes. Was he carried out? It was a lie, a fabrication, an exaggeration twisted by time and malice. But if he engaged with the details, if he said, "I wasn't carried, I walked," or "I had a few drinks, but I was fine," he would be validating the premise. He would be dragging the Secretary of Defense confirmation down into the gutter of a drunken night in Virginia 7 years ago. He would be arguing about beer counts instead of missile defense. He had to reject the frame. He had to reject the game entirely. He looked Kelly in the eye. He didn't blink. "Senator," Hegseth said. His voice was controlled, but there was steel in it. Anonymous smears. He didn't play the true or false game. He didn't say false. He labeled the weapon. Anonymous smears. It was a shield, but it was also an accusation. He was telling Kelly, "You are trafficking in garbage. You are bringing the whispers of cowards into the Senate record." Kelly didn't flinch. He didn't pause to consider the validity of Hegseth's rebuttal. He didn't care that the source was anonymous. The source served the purpose. The accusation was now on the record. The mud had been thrown. Whether it stuck or not was irrelevant. The stain was there. Kelly looked back down at his paper. He moved immediately to the next bullet point. No follow-up. No, why do you say that? Just the relentless, rhythmic pounding of the artillery. Just true or false? Kelly insisted, his voice tightening. He was annoyed that the rat wasn't taking the cheese. He wanted a yes or a no. He wanted the soundbite. Very simple. Very simple. The arrogance of it burned. Summer of 2014 in Cleveland, Kelly read. Another date. Another location. The dossier was thick. They had mapped his life, tracked his movements, interviewed every waiter, every bartender, every disgruntled ex-employee who had ever been within 10 feet of him. Drunk in public with the CVA team. Drunk in public. Again, vague. What does that mean? Loud? Happy? Stumbling? Or just having a beer on a patio? In the puritanical world of the Senate Democrats, suddenly finding their moral compass after years of ignoring their own scandals. Any alcohol consumption by a conservative was evidence of moral decay. Hegseth stared at the man across from him. He realized with crystal clarity that this wasn't about vetting a nominee. This was a public flogging. They wanted to break him. They wanted him to snap. They wanted him to get angry, to yell, to look unstable. See? He has a temper. He's a drunk. He's dangerous. He clamped his jaw shut. He wouldn't give them the anger. He would give them the wall. Anonymous smears, Hegseth repeated. The phrase felt repetitive in his mouth, but it was the only truth available. These were smears. They were designed to destroy. And they were anonymous because the people making them didn't have the courage to sit in that chair and face him under oath. Kelly stopped. He looked up over the rim of his glasses. The repetition was irritating him. He had expected Hegseth to crumble, to apologize, to make excuses. Instead, he was getting a stonewall. "I'm just asking for true or false question," Kelly said, his grammar slipping slightly in his frustration. True or false answers. He sounded like a disappointed schoolteacher scolding a petulant child. "Answer the question the way I told you to answer it." Hegseth didn't move. He sat like a statue. He was channeling every ounce of his military bearing. Hold the line. Do not engage. Do not step into the kill zone. Kelly realized he wasn't going to get the true/false he wanted. So he escalated. If the drinking wasn't enough to get a reaction, he would go darker. He would go to the place that could end a career in a heartbeat in the #MeToo era. He looked down at the paper, and a shadow seemed to pass over his face. This was the next level of the ambush. An event in North Carolina, Kelly said, his voice dropping lower, more serious. Drunk in front of 3 young female staff members. Young female staff members. The phrase was chosen with surgical precision. It weaponized gender. It weaponized power dynamics. It evoked images of predation, of unsafe environments, of a boss out of control. It was the ultimate dog whistle in modern politics. even without an accusation of assault. Yet, the mere proximity of drunk male boss and young female staff was enough to convict in the court of public opinion. After you had instituted a no-alcohol policy and then reversed it, Kelly looked up, delivering the coup de grace. True or false? The room was deathly silent. The air conditioner hummed, a low drone that sounded like a flatline. Every eye was on Hegseth. The Republican senators were rigid. This was getting ugly. This was getting personal in a way that Senate hearings rarely did. Usually, there was a veneer of civility. This was a street fight. Hegseth felt the heat rising in his collar. This was low. They were dragging his staff, his team, people he had mentored and worked with into this mud pit. They were painting him as a monster. He looked at Kelly, the hero, the astronaut, the man on the stamp, and saw nothing but a political hitman holding a smoking gun. Anonymous smears, Hegseth said again. His voice was steady, but his eyes were burning. He was holding onto his composure by a thread. He knew the worst was yet to come. Kelly was just warming up. The true or false game was just a jab. The haymaker was coming, and they both knew it. The rhythm of the room had changed. It was no longer a hearing. It was a drumming. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of Mark Kelly's voice, monotonous and relentless, driving nails into the coffin of a reputation. Hegseth sat in the center of the kill zone. The air conditioning seemed to have stopped, or perhaps the blood rushing in his ears was just drowning out the hum. He felt the sweat prickling under his starch-stiff collar, but he refused to wipe it. To wipe was to show weakness. To wipe was to bleed. Kelly didn't look up. He didn't need to. He had the script, and the script was God. December of 2014, Kelly intoned, his finger sliding down the page to the next indictment. The date was tossed out like a piece of evidence in a murder trial. At the CVA Christmas party at the Grand Hyatt at Washington, D.C., he paused. He let the location sink in. The Grand Hyatt, a place of lobbyists, donors, and the elite. A place where the establishment drank $300 bottles of wine and made deals that sold out the heartland. Kelly was setting the scene, painting Hegseth not as a warrior, but as a swamp creature indulging in excess. "You are noticeably intoxicated," Kelly said, savoring the syllables. Noticeably, a subjective word. Noticeable to whom? To the puritanical spy taking notes in the corner? To the political enemy waiting for a slip? And had to be carried up to your room. Carried. Again. The image was redundant but effective. It reinforced the narrative of helplessness. The leader who cannot lead himself. The warrior who cannot walk. It was an image designed to emasculate. Is that true or false? Kelly snapped. The trap snapped shut. Hegseth stared at him. The absurdity of it was almost funny in a dark, twisted way. They were talking about a Christmas party, a holiday celebration from a decade ago. While China was building hypersonic missiles, while Iran was enriching uranium, while the recruitment numbers for the Army were in freefall, the United States Senate was debating how many drinks Pete Hegseth had at a Christmas party in 2014. It was a farce, a dangerous, distracting farce. Anonymous smears, Hegseth said. He kept his voice flat. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a new answer. He would starve the fire of oxygen. Kelly didn't miss a beat. He was a machine now, a piston of political destruction. Another time, Kelly said, moving on before the echo of Hegseth's denial had even faded. A CVA staffer stated that you passed out in the back of a party bus. A party bus. A titter ran through the press gallery. You could hear it, the soft, derisive snicker of the coastal elites. A party bus. How low class. How unsenatorial. They looked down their noses at him. These people who spent their weekends at Martha's Vineyard or in Georgetown salons. To them, a party bus was something for high school proms or bachelor parties in Vegas. It was a symbol of immaturity. But Hegseth knew the truth of those buses. They were morale. They were team building. They were young veterans, men and women who had spent their 20s in the desert avoiding IEDs, finally blowing off steam, finally feeling alive without the threat of death hanging over them. But Kelly stripped all that humanity away. He reduced it to a grotesque caricature, the drunk on the bus. Is that true or false? Hegseth looked at the man who had been to space. He wondered if the lack of gravity had atrophied his sense of honor. Anonymous smears, Hegseth repeated. The words were tasting like ash in his mouth now. He knew how it sounded. He knew the media would cut a montage of him saying it over and over again, making him look like a robot. Hegseth refuses to answer. Hegseth dodges. But what was the alternative? To debate the physics of passing out versus sleeping? To argue about the lighting on a bus in 2014? No. Deny the premise. Reject the court. Kelly took a breath. The room seemed to darken. The previous questions, the Christmas party, the bus, those were just jabs. Those were body blows to soften the target. Now came the headshot. Kelly adjusted his glasses. He looked down at the paper. Then, for a brief second, he looked up at the cameras. He wanted to make sure they were rolling. He wanted to make sure the red light was on. This was the moment that would define the hearing. This was the moment the Democratic operatives had been high-fiving about in the prep room. In 2014, Kelly began, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. While in Louisiana on official business for CVA, Louisiana, the location changed everything. It wasn't D.C. It wasn't a party. It was official business. That raised the stakes. It implied a misuse of funds, a misuse of time, a dereliction of duty. Did you take your staff, including young female staff members? He paused. He let the phrase, young female staff members, hang there like a toxic cloud. He was priming the audience. He was triggering the hashtag #MeToo reflex. He was suggesting a power dynamic so gross, so predatory, that the specific allegation almost didn't matter. The setup was the crime. To a strip club? The words hit the room like a physical blow. Strip club. The silence was absolute. It was a vacuum. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The stenographer's fingers hovered over the keys. It was the ultimate scarlet letter in American politics. You can survive corruption. You can survive incompetence. You can sometimes even survive adultery. But strip club? It was sleazy. It was tawdry. It was a weapon designed to alienate the suburban women voters, the religious base, the very people Hegseth needed. It was a character assassination nuke. And the genius of the attack was the inclusion of young female staff members. It transformed a potentially forgivable sin, a guy's night out, into a workplace harassment nightmare. It painted Hegseth not just as a patron of vice, but as a boss who forced his female subordinates into a degrading, sexualized environment. Hegseth felt the blood rush to his face, not from shame, but from rage. Pure, white-hot rage. He remembered that trip. He remembered the context. But he also knew that context was dead in this room. Context was a casualty of war. Absolutely not, Hegseth shot back. The answer came out fast, sharp, like a reflex. It was the first time he had broken the pattern. He didn't just say anonymous smears. He issued a denial. A hard, categorical denial. Anonymous smears, he added quickly, returning to the shield. But the crack had appeared. He had engaged. Kelly's eyes glittered. He had drawn blood. He had forced a reaction. Now he would twist the knife. So, Kelly said, his voice smooth, pivoting instantly. He didn't stop to argue about the club. He had something worse. Something darker. Is it accurate that the organization reached a financial settlement? Financial settlement. The phrase was a trapdoor. In the corporate and political world, settlement was synonymous with guilt. You don't pay if you didn't do it. That was the public perception. The reality, that organizations settle nuisance lawsuits every day to save legal fees, was too complex for a 7-minute soundbite. With a female staffer who claimed to be a strip club with you, Kelly was weaving a web. He was linking Hegseth physically to the location, with you, and legally to the payout. And there was a colleague who attempted to sexually assault her. Sexual assault. The term landed on the table like a dead body. The room froze. This was it. The nuclear option. Mark Kelly, the soft-spoken astronaut, had just dropped the words sexual assault into the record next to Pete Hegseth's name. It didn't matter that the sentence structure was complicated. It didn't matter that Kelly said a colleague, implying someone else. The headline was already written: Hegseth, strip clubs, and sexual assault settlements. The brain processes information by association. Hegseth plus strip club plus sexual assault. The distinction of who did the assaulting would be lost in the noise. It was guilt by proximity, guilt by leadership. Kelly looked at Hegseth with a look of faux concern. Was there a financial settlement? It was a masterclass in entrapment. If Hegseth said yes, he was admitting knowledge of the assault and the cover-up. If he said no, and a document surfaced later, he was staring at a perjury charge. If he said, I don't know, he looked like an incompetent leader who didn't know his organization was paying off sexual assault victims. Hegseth's mind was a whirlwind. He was being asked to testify about a legal agreement involving another person, likely covered by a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, regarding an event he had already denied attending. It was a legal minefield wrapped in a political suicide vest. Senator, Hegseth said, his voice tight. He was fighting to keep the tremor out. I was not involved in that. He tried to distance himself. Not me. Not my crime. I don't know the nature of how that played out, he added. It was the truth. As a figurehead or a specific leader, he might not have been privy to the HR settlements of every staffer dispute, especially if legal counsel handled it. But Kelly wasn't letting him off the hook. He cut in sharp and fast. But you understand, Kelly pressed, his voice rising, lecturing, there was a financial settlement for a young female staffer who accused another member of the organization, not you, of sexual assault in a strip club. Kelly said, not you, quickly, a throwaway disclaimer, but he hammered the rest. Sexual assault in a strip club. He was cementing the environment. He was saying, maybe you didn't rape her, Pete, but you took her there. You created the playground where the monster could hunt. We have multiple statements on the record referring to that, Kelly bluffed. Or maybe he wasn't bluffing. Maybe he had the receipts. Or maybe he had statements from the same anonymous individuals who hated Hegseth's guts. But you claim you were not there when that occurred, Kelly said, his tone dripping with skepticism. It was the Perry Mason moment. You say you weren't there, but your organization paid a woman who was assaulted there. How can both be true, Mr. Hegseth? Were you a ghost? Or are you a liar? Hegseth felt the walls closing in. The sheer injustice of it was suffocating. He was being held responsible for the alleged actions of a colleague, at a place he denied being, in a year that felt like a lifetime ago. Absolutely not, Hegseth said again. But the words felt lighter this time, less effective. The accusation was too heavy. The slime was too thick. It was coating him. He could feel it. He could see it in the eyes of the people in the room. They weren't looking at the next Secretary of Defense anymore. They were looking at a scandal. Kelly paused. He took a sip of water. He had done the damage. He had planted the explosive. Now, he would simply watch it burn. He looked at the clock. He had time. He wasn't done. Now, the behavior I cited, if true, Kelly began, moving to the moral lecture phase of the operation. If true, the politician's favorite shield. He could say anything, as long as he prefaced it with if true. If true, you eat babies. If true, you hate puppies. Do you think that this behavior? Kelly waved his hand, encompassing the imaginary strip club, the imaginary booze, the imaginary assault. Of intoxication, going into these type of establishments, women on your staff being so uncomfortable that they have to file these sort of harassment claims. He leaned forward, his face a mask of solemn judgment. Do you think this is appropriate behavior for a leader? It was a rhetorical question, a trap. If Hegseth said no, he was condemning himself in the eyes of the public who assumed he did it. If he said yes, he was a monster. If he argued the premise, I didn't do it, Kelly would just cycle back. But if you did, would it be bad? It was a circular hell. Hegseth looked at the man. He looked at the medals on his own chest and his mind's eye. Medals earned in dust and blood, where appropriate behavior meant keeping your men alive. He looked at Kelly, a man who had been protected by the pristine machinery of NASA and the Navy, a man who had never had to build a grassroots movement from the ground up, fighting in the mud of political warfare. Senator, Hegseth began. He needed to pivot. He needed to get out of the strip club. He needed to get back to the mission. Well, Senator, the overwhelming majority of anyone who's worked for me. Hegseth started, trying to summon the army of witnesses who didn't hate him, the men and women who respected him. including on the record statements that have been submitted to this with their name on it. He emphasized name on it, a jab at the anonymous cowards, are the overwhelming preponderance of evidence that testify to my leadership. He was rambling slightly. The prose was getting purple. Overwhelming preponderance. He was using too many words. He was on the defensive. He was trying to build a wall of words to stop the flood of sludge. And professionalism in leading vets for freedom and concerned veterans for America. Kelly didn't care. He was looking at his watch. He was looking at the chairman. He was signaling, I've got him. He's explaining. If you're explaining, you're losing. My leadership has been completely impeached, Hegseth said, his voice rising with a touch of desperation. On these veterans organizations that did fantastic work. He was pleading now, pleading for the record, pleading for his legacy. Look at the work. Don't look at the mud. Look at what we achieved. Mr. Hegseth, Kelly interrupted. He didn't let him finish. He didn't let him land the point about the fantastic work. I'm not even going to go into the... Hegseth tried to continue to bring up the financial books, the integrity, the clean audits. How many people? Kelly talked over him. Everybody who runs the campaign. Hegseth tried to shout over the wind. I have limited time, Kelly snapped. The gavel of time. The ultimate silencer. I have limited time. Translation. I have successfully poured the poison into the water supply. I don't have time to let you filter it out. Kelly cut him off cold. He wasn't interested in Hegseth's defense. He wasn't interested in on the record statements. He had his soundbite. Strip club. Sexual assault settlement. Drunk. The narrative was set. The concrete was pouring. And Pete Hegseth was cemented in it, right up to his neck. The room was no longer a room. It was an echo chamber. A sealed acoustic environment designed to amplify the narrative of the establishment and dampen the voice of the dissident. Pete Hegseth sat at the center of it, his hands clasped on the table, feeling the vibrations of the attack still humming in the wood. The strip club allegation was hanging in the air like a noxious gas. He could see the reporters in the back typing furiously. They weren't fact-checking. They weren't asking for the receipts or the signed affidavits. They were just transcribing the mud. Hegseth, strip club, sexual assault. The SEO keywords were already trending. He realized then that truth was a secondary currency here. The primary currency was damage. I'm not even going to go into the... Hegseth started again, his voice rasping slightly. He wanted to talk about the books, the audits, the financial integrity of the organizations he had run. He wanted to fight math with math. But Mark Kelly wasn't interested in math. He was interested in mythology. The mythology of Pete Hegseth as the erratic, dangerous, drunken frat boy who stumbled his way into the Pentagon. I have limited time, Kelly cut in, his voice sharp, efficient. He wielded the clock like a truncheon. Then Kelly did something subtle. He shifted the battlefield. He knew Hegseth was relying on his reputation as a conservative media star, a man beloved by millions of Fox News viewers. So Kelly decided to turn that strength into a liability. I'm not going to get into the accusations that come from Fox News, Kelly said. He said Fox News with a specific intonation, a slight curl of the lip, a tone of patrician disdain. In the halls of the Senate, among the Ivy League staffers and the New York Times subscribers, Fox News was a punchline. It was a synonym for propaganda, for low-information voters, for the rabble. By invoking the name, Kelly was signaling to his tribe. See? Even his own people hate him. I know you have some of your Fox News colleagues here, Kelly added, glancing briefly toward the audience, perhaps spotting a familiar face from the network. It was a psychological wedge. He was planting paranoia. Your friends are watching Pete, and they're whispering. There are multiple instances of accusations against you about drinking on the job, Kelly continued. He was relentless. He didn't need one big scandal. He just needed a pile of little ones. Death by volume. Hegseth felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his turf. He knew these people. He had worked the morning shift, the 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. grind on Fox and Friends weekend. He knew the camaraderie, the pressure, the relentless pace of live television. To suggest he was drunk on the job while anchoring a major cable news show was not just insulting. It was professionally impossible. You don't survive in that chair if you're slurring your words. He leaned into the microphone. He was done playing defense. He needed a counterpunch. Oh, anonymous, Hegseth fired back. His voice was stronger now, fueled by the indignation of the falsely accused. All false, he added, punching the syllable. All refuted by my colleagues who I worked with for 10 years at 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and everything. He was speaking fast, trying to cram a decade of hard work and professionalism into the nanoseconds Kelly was allowing him. He was trying to summon the army of producers, cameramen, sound engineers, and co-hosts who knew the real Pete Hegseth. The people who had seen him prep for segments at 4 a.m. The people who had seen him with his family. But in this room, those people didn't exist. They were ghosts. The only colleagues Kelly cared about were the ones hiding in the shadows, leaking poison. Kelly listened to the outburst with a look of bored patience. He waited for Hegseth to stop, like a parent waiting for a toddler to finish a tantrum. "Challenge here for me, Mr. Hegseth," Kelly said. He used the name again, but it sounded less like an address and more like a diagnosis. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was a theatrical gesture of exhaustion. The weary statesman pose. "I am trying so hard to help you, but you make it so difficult." Is when there is discussion about personal challenges, Kelly said, his voice dropping into a register of faux empathy. "And you admittedly had issues with heavy drinking." He was circling back to the book. The confession. Hegseth's moment of vulnerability was being weaponized again. "You admitted it once, so you must be guilty of everything." "It's hard to kind of square this," Kelly said, making a hand gesture, bringing his palms together but not quite touching. "To square the circle here. Square the circle." An idiom for doing the impossible. Kelly was framing the narrative beautifully for the cameras. He was saying, "I want to confirm you. I want to believe in redemption. But your past is just too messy. You are too broken." It's kind of a difficult thing to do," Kelly murmured, looking down at his notes as if searching for a solution that didn't exist. It was gaslighting of the highest order. The difficulty wasn't real. The difficulty was manufactured by the very questions Kelly was asking. He was creating the storm and then complaining about the rain. Hegseth watched the performance. He saw the calculation behind the hesitation. He saw the sharks swimming beneath the calm waters of concern. "Let me ask you if, Kelly checked the clock again. The countdown was on. "I have about 90 seconds left here." 90 seconds. The executioner was checking the hourglass. Kelly looked up, and his eyes were hard. The empathy was gone. The weary statesman was gone. The prosecutor was back. If you had to answer these questions about sexual assault against you," he slipped in again. "Sexual assault against you." He didn't say alleged. He didn't say the settlement regarding someone else. He personalized it. "Against you. And your drinking and your personal conduct. Would have been different if you were under oath?" The trap snapped shut with a metallic clang. The room went absolute zero. It was the perjury trap. Technically, Hegseth was in a Senate hearing. He was compelled to tell the truth. But Kelly was drawing a distinction, a hypothetical legal distinction. He was asking, if you were in a court of law, facing jail time for perjury, would you still be lying to me right now? It was a question with no right answer. If Hegseth said, yes, it would be different. He was admitting that his current testimony was casual, loose, potentially false. He was admitting that he was lying now. If he said, no, he was claiming a level of absolute truth that Kelly would immediately attack as arrogance. Oh, so you're saying you're perfect? But the insinuation was the real weapon. By asking the question, Kelly was implying that Hegseth wasn't under oath or that he wasn't taking this seriously. He was implying that Hegseth was a hustler, a TV personality who was used to spinning narratives, not a statesman bound by the solemnity of the Constitution. Hegseth stared at the senator. He felt a flash of heat behind his eyes. He wanted to say, I swore an oath when I joined the army. I swore an oath when I deployed. I swore an oath to defend this country with my life. My word is my bond, senator. I don't need a Bible and a bailiff to tell me to speak the truth. But he couldn't say that. It was too long. It was too emotional. And Kelly would just smirk and say, so, is that a no? Hegseth realized he was in a Kobayashi Maru scenario, a no-win simulation designed to test character. But in Star Trek, Captain Kirk cheated to win. Hegseth couldn't cheat. He just had to survive. Senator, Hegseth said, his voice low, controlled, dangerously calm. All I'm pointing out is the false claims against me. He sidestepped the trap. He refused to engage with the hypothetical. He returned to the only ground he had left. The claims are false. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said, your premise is flawed. Kelly paused. He looked at Hegseth for a long beat. The silence stretched. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with the unsaid. Kelly hadn't gotten the confession. He hadn't gotten the stumble, but he had gotten the evasion. And in politics, an evasion was as good as a confession. Okay, Kelly said. The word was dismissive. Final. I take it you do not want to answer that question. He answered it for him. He wrote the headline. Hegseth refuses to answer under oath question. Kelly turned his head slightly, breaking eye contact. He was done with the witness. The interrogation was over. Now, it was time for the closing argument. The verdict. He had 60 seconds left. Enough time to deliver the eulogy for Pete Hegseth's career. The interrogation was over, but the execution was just beginning. Mark Kelly didn't look at his notes anymore. He didn't need them. The questions, part of the script, was finished. Now came the monologue, the clip that would be packaged, captioned, and blasted out to every liberal donor list in the country within the hour. He leaned back slightly, creating a physical distance from the table, from the microphone, and from the man sitting across from him. It was a gesture of separation. I am here, safe on the shores of righteousness. You are there, drowning in the sea of your own scandal. I walked into this hearing this morning, Kelly began. His voice shifted gears. It wasn't the sharp staccato of the inquisitor anymore. It was the grave, heavy baritone of the disappointed father, concerned that you haven't demonstrated adequate leadership in your civilian roles. Hegseth sat motionless. The muscle in his jaw had stopped jumping. He had entered a state of stoic endurance. He heard the past tense. I walked into this hearing. It was a slip, or perhaps a boast. Kelly was admitting the quiet part out loud. My mind was made up before you even sat down, Pete. Before you said a word. Before you denied a single smear. The verdict was written before the trial began. The hearing was theater. The decision had been made in a closed-door caucus meeting days ago. Hegseth was never going to be confirmed by these people. He was brought here to be bloodied, to be made an example of, to show anyone else from the MAGA movement who dared to dream of high office. This is what happens when you cross the line. And this is a dangerous world we're living in here, Kelly continued. He invoked the specter of war. Russia, China, the Middle East. He used the very real threats facing the nation as a cudgel to beat a man who had actually fought in those wars. And America cannot afford a Secretary of Defense who is unprepared for that mission. Unprepared. Hegseth's hands remained clasped. He thought of the years of study, the degrees from Princeton and Harvard, the combat tours, the years advocating for veterans policy. Was he unprepared? Or was he just uncontrollable? That was the real fear. They didn't fear his incompetence. They feared his disruption. They feared a Secretary of Defense who wouldn't just rubber stamp the defense contracts, who wouldn't just play the revolving door game between the Pentagon and Raytheon. They feared an outsider. Kelly paused. He let the word mission hang in the air, appropriating the military language that Hegseth lived by, twisting it to serve a political end. I'm going to leave with concerns about your transparency, Kelly declared. He was wrapping it up. The final summation. You say you've had personal issues in your past, Kelly said, pointing a finger, not at Hegseth, but at the idea of him. Yet, when asked about those very issues, you blame an anonymous smear campaign even when many of these claims are not anonymous. It was the big lie technique in action. Kelly repeated the assertion that the claims weren't anonymous, despite the fact that every specific allegation he had read, the party bus, the drunk carrying, the strip club, had originated from unnamed sources or leaked documents. He was gaslighting the record in real time. Which is it? Kelly asked, but he didn't wait for an answer. It wasn't a question. It was a trap. Have you overcome personal issues, or are you the target of a smear campaign? He presented a false dichotomy, a binary choice designed to imprison the truth. Option A, you are a broken man with issues. Option B, you are a paranoid man claiming conspiracies. Kelly leaned in, his eyes narrowing behind the rimless glasses. It can't be both. But of course it could be both. In the real world, the messy, complex world outside the Senate bubble, a man could have struggled with alcohol in the past, overcome it, written a book about it, and then be targeted by a smear campaign that exaggerated those past struggles and invented new ones like sexual assault cover-ups to destroy him. Nuance, however, had died in that room hours ago. It's clear to me, Kelly said. The final judgment. The gavel was coming down. It's clear to me that you're not being honest with us or the American people. The accusation landed with a dull thud. Liar. Hegseth felt the eyes of the room burning into him. To be called a liar by a man who had just spent 7 minutes twisting the truth was a bitter pill. But he swallowed it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't shout. He knew that any outburst now would only validate Kelly's narrative of instability. Kelly paused for effect. He was setting up the kill shot, the soundbite that would lead the nightly news. Because the truth would disqualify you from getting the job. There it was. The presumption of guilt. Kelly wasn't saying, "We have found evidence that disqualifies you." He was saying, "I know there is a dark secret, and you are hiding it." He was convicting Hegseth of a hypothetical crime. He was weaponizing the unknown. The truth would disqualify you. It was a sentence designed to linger, to plant a seed of doubt that would grow into a tree of suspicion. Even if Hegseth was cleared, even if every allegation was debunked tomorrow, that sentence would remain. What is the truth? What is he hiding? It was the mark of Cain. And just as concerning as each of these specific disqualifying accusations are, Kelly added, piling on the dirt, ensuring the grave was deep enough. What concerns me just as much is the idea of having a Secretary of Defense who is not transparent. Transparency, the ultimate irony. This coming from a committee that operated on leaks, backroom deals, and anonymous sources. This coming from a political machine that had spent years obscuring the truth about everything from foreign policy failures to the president's health. Kelly closed his folder. Snap! The sound was small, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." Kelly turned away. He didn't look at Hegseth. He didn't nod. He simply disengaged. He washed his hands of the matter. He had done his job. He had delivered the payload. The target was destroyed. The camera lingered on Pete Hegseth. For a moment, he sat there, alone in the frame. The background hum of the room returned. The shuffling of papers, the low murmurs of the aides, the click-click-click of the photographers capturing the aftermath. Hegseth didn't look defeated. He looked hardened. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of the people who ruled this city, the people who thought they ruled the country. He saw the smug satisfaction on the Democratic side. He saw the uncomfortable, averted gazes on the Republican side. He realized then that this wasn't about him. It wasn't about the strip club or the beer or the bus. It was about power. It was about the terrifying, unyielding power of the establishment to crush anything that threatened its existence. He had walked into the room a nominee. He was leaving a survivor. He adjusted his tie, a small, deliberate movement. He squared his shoulders. The open book he had offered them had been torn apart, page by page, and burned. But the man who wrote it was still there. He looked directly into the camera lens, past the room, past the senators, past the anonymous smears, and into the living rooms of the millions of Americans who felt just as silenced, just as judged, just as dismissed as he was in that moment. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence spoke for him. "You can smear me. You can block me. But you can't break me." The chairman banged the gavel. "We will recess." The sound echoed through the Hart Senate office building, fading into the cold, recycled air. The hearing was over. The character assassination was complete. But as Pete Hegseth stood up, pushing the chair back with a scrape of wood against the floor, he didn't look like a man who was leaving. He looked like a man who was just getting started.